Hi, and welcome to this session which will explain how to report your import transactions in VAT services on Amazon. Firstly, we will recap what imports are and why these are relevant for your VAT reporting on VAT services on Amazon. Goods are imported into the EU when they are physically brought into an EU country from a country which is located outside of the EU. For example, where goods are shipped from China into the EU, this will be an import. The country of importation is usually the country of the first physical entry of the goods into the EU, and this may be different from the final destination country depending on the movement of the goods. An example of this may be where the first port of entry of the goods is the UK, but then the goods are subsequently shipped into Germany. In this case, the country of importation for VAT purposes is the UK. Import VAT is payable on the import of the goods to the customs authority in the country of importation. The rate of import VAT due will be the same as would apply if the goods were sold locally in the country of importation. On importation, you will receive documentation from the customs authority, known as a customs bill, which contains all relevant information about the goods that are being imported, including the VAT rate and the amount of import VAT paid. Some countries will also provide you with a summary of all of your import VAT paid for the VAT return period. For example, the UK will issue all importers with a C79 form, which looks like this. And here you can see we have the name of the company, the VAT registration number of the company, the period to which the list relates, and then the list of all import VAT payable for that period. The customs bill, which you will receive for each individual importation, is standardized across the EU, so the information on the document will be the same regardless of which EU country you import your goods into. And this is what the customs bill looks like. And it will contain most of the information that you need to provide in the additional VAT report for VAT services on Amazon to report your import transactions. You must declare all imports you make into an EU country that have come from a non-EU country. Even if you were not required to pay any import VAT to the customs authority in the country of importation, the import still needs to be declared in your VAT return. You must include all imports of goods, including those which are imported and fulfilled by Amazon, or those that you import and sell off Amazon. The Amazon VAT Transactions Report does not provide details of these imports. If you import goods through a country that is not filed through VAT services on Amazon, and which are then moved to a warehouse or used to fulfill an order in one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries, then this movement may also need to be reported. There are a number of ways that you may import your goods into the EU, and how you need to report this in your additional VAT report will depend on the exact flow of the goods. If the country of importation of your goods is one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries, then you must declare the import of goods split by commodity code as a single import transaction. Even if you did not pay any VAT on import, you should declare the import transaction using the relevant import regime code, and these will be explained later. For example, if you move goods from China into the UK, then in your additional VAT report, you should report one import transaction with the departure country being China and the arrival country being the UK. Alternatively, if you import goods into one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries, and then those goods are transferred to a warehouse in another one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries, then you are required to report two separate transactions: an import transaction into the country of importation and a stock movement transaction from the country of importation to the destination country. This is because, just like an import transaction, stock movements between EU countries are taxable transactions for VAT purposes, even though the goods have not yet been sold at that moment and there is no cash outflow. This is probably best explained through an example. So if you move goods from China into Germany but through the UK, as shown here, then you will need to report both an import transaction and a stock movement transaction. So the import transaction will be from China to the UK, being that first port of entry into the EU. But you will then also need to report that second movement from the UK, being the country of importation, to Germany, being the destination country. Another scenario may be where the country of importation of your goods is not one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries. In this case, you are only required to declare a stock movement transaction, which shows the movement of the goods from the country of importation to the destination country. For example, if you move goods from China to Germany, but those goods are imported through the Netherlands, then you are only required to report a stock movement transaction from the Netherlands to Germany. This is because the import VAT is declared in the Netherlands, which is not one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries. However, please note that you will still be responsible for declaring these imports in the Netherlands off Amazon, as this will not be through VAT services on Amazon. In some cases, you may notice that Amazon has pre-populated some import transactions into the additional VAT report for you. This will happen if you are a Fulfillment by Amazon seller and you import goods into the EU which are inbounded directly to an Amazon fulfillment center. You may need to modify the transaction depending on the flow of the goods. For example, if the country of the Amazon fulfillment center is also the country of importation, then you should complete the missing details for the import transaction pre-populated by Amazon, and we will come back to these details later. This is because you are only required to declare an import transaction when you are importing directly into the country where the goods will be stored. As an example, you may have an inbound transaction departing from China and arriving in the UK. In this case, the goods are imported directly into the UK, and so Amazon will pre-populate one import transaction for you from China to the UK, and then you are required to complete the details needed for this import transaction only. We expect that this type of inbound is the most common, where you ship your goods to an Amazon fulfillment center in the country of importation. So if this is how you import your goods, then you do not need to pay attention to the next two scenarios. However, if you import your goods through a country of importation, which is different to the country where you will inbound the goods to an Amazon fulfillment center, then you may need to modify the transaction which has been pre-populated by Amazon. If the country of importation is a VAT services on Amazon filing country, then you will be required to undertake two steps. Firstly, you will need to change the arrival country of the import transaction from the country of the Amazon fulfillment center to the country of importation. Secondly, you will need to include a stock movement transaction from the country of importation to the country of the Amazon fulfillment center. This will allow us to correctly report your import VAT obligations in the country of importation using details that are not part of the data available for inbound transactions. Again, this will be best explained through an example. So if you inbound goods from China to an Amazon fulfillment center in Germany, but the goods first arrive through the UK, then Amazon will add an import transaction to the additional VAT report, departing from China and arriving in Germany, as you can see here. This is because Amazon cannot see your country of importation. So in this case, you must update the import transaction so that it departs from China and arrives in the UK. You must then also add a stock movement transaction, which departs from the UK to Germany. However, if the country of importation is not one of your VAT services on Amazon filing countries, then your steps may be slightly different. First, you should change the import transaction pre-populated in the additional VAT report into a stock movement transaction. Then, you will need to change the departure country of the transaction from the non-EU country to the country of importation. Again, this will allow us to correctly report the movement of the goods within the EU. We do not need to report the import VAT obligations because the country of importation is not one of your filing countries. However, please note that you will still be responsible for declaring these imports in the country of importation, although this will not be through VAT services on Amazon. Again, using an example, if you move goods from China to Germany, but the goods are imported through the Netherlands, like so, then you are only required to report a stock movement transaction from Netherlands to Germany. So here you will see Amazon will add an import transaction from China to Germany. However, we must change the import to a stock movement and change the departure country to the Netherlands. As part of the setup process to allow you to report your import transactions, you will be asked to provide a sample of your customs documentation, including sample customs bills. This documentation will be reviewed by your tax agent to configure your account for the methods of importation which you use to import your goods into the EU. This way, your tax agent can be sure that any import VAT obligations that you may have on importation are being correctly reported in your VAT filings. The customs bill also contains important information that you should use to complete the required fields for the import transaction. All import transactions and related stock movement transactions must be reported in the additional VAT report, as we have seen earlier. We will now go through the fields which you must complete when declaring import transactions. So here you will see the sales channel. Now, any import transactions which have been pre-populated by Amazon will use Amazon. Otherwise, you should use non-Amazon when declaring your import transactions. For the transaction type, this will either be import or stock movement, depending on the circumstances. For the transaction event ID, please use the customs bill number, which can be found here on your customs bill. So you can see we've plugged that in just here. For the transaction complete date, please use the date of the customs bill, which can be found down at the bottom, along with the place of entry. So that just comes right into here. You will then be required to add the manufacture country of the item, the number of items imported, and the total weight of all of the items imported. We will then also need to add the total VAT exclusive price of the items. For import transactions, you are required to provide the customs value of the goods, which is usually the cost price that you paid for the goods, including any insurance and customs duty. This value is also declared on your customs bill along with the VAT rate of the items and the amount of import VAT that you paid. Now this can all be found here on the customs bill, and you can see your customs value will be in here, the import VAT rate here, and the total amount of import VAT in the third column. And then we just slot those into our additional VAT report. You will also be required to add the commodity code of the items. You should use the commodity code of the goods as it appears on the customs bill. So this can be found in box 33, commodity code. And so we just insert that directly into the additional VAT report. Next, you will be required to add the departure country, the arrival country, and the postcode in the arrival country. So in this case, our departure country would be the last non-EU country from which the goods depart, and again, the arrival country will be that first port of entry into the EU. You should also declare the mode of transportation and the delivery conditions. Next, you will also be required to provide your VAT number in the country of importation. You should use your VAT number that is declared on the customs bill, and that can be found here, which will appear along with your company name. So then we just slot that right into the additional VAT report. For the taxable jurisdiction, please use the country of importation. And finally, the import regime field. There are 3 types of import regimes that you may import your goods under, and they are here. So we have regular, postponed, and exempt. Use regular if you pay import VAT on importation. Please use exempt if you are not required to pay any import VAT on importation either immediately or in the future. And finally, you should use postponed if you are required to pay import VAT on importation, however, you are allowed to declare and recover it through your VAT return. You will require a specific license to import under this regime, and so you will only be authorized to use it if you have provided your tax agent with a sample of your customs documentation.